Hi, everybody. I hope you are all in good health. And I want to talk to you today about EFOs. So let me get started. If I can share my screen. Let me know when you can see it. And,
There we got you up.
And here, that should be the presentation.
There you go. You're all set and ready to go.
Thank you. So as Bill mentioned, I've been in the STEM field for a long time. But I have been active only for the last 20 years, really, in terms of, being a contributor to the hobby as such. I've been collecting passively for much longer than that. As he mentioned, I'm very active in the EFO Collectors Club. And also, I have been recently working with Jack Denise to resurrect the Albrecht Dürer study unit. So I'm working on that too. And what I want to do today is I have an agenda. I want to tell you why I think you should and how you could add EFOs to your thematic or topical collections. So I'm going to stay away from formal definitions. I'm going to try to be as practical as possible so that, you don't need to know anything about EFOs to understand what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to show you lots of EFOs, and that will be only scratching the surface. And because there is a huge variety of EFOs, and you will notice that. Then I will talk about how to find information about EFOs, because EFOs are, have peculiarities in terms of information. It is very individualistic. One EFO may exist only in a very small quantity. And then I want to talk about how to acquire EFOs. Let me get started by saying that, by giving you a definition. So, and this is the last formal definition that I will give essentially. They are EFOs. EFO stands for errors, freaks, and oddities. These are essentially philatelic items like stamps and postal stationery that somehow are different than intended. Typically, they may be misprinted, maybe they are miscut, maybe the perforations are not right. Lots of things can go wrong because it's very complex actually to print a stamp. And if you think it's complex to print a stamp, postal stationery even is much harder. Think about all the equipment that might be needed in order to fold an envelope with a stamp that is printed on it. There you have much more chances that things will go wrong. So anyway, we love when things go wrong because it gives us things to collect. So first, let me start by busting the myths, okay? And when people often hear about EFOs, they think of a stamp with a plane upside down. That's an EFO for sure, it's an error, and it will set you back by probably about $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 to buy one. But you know something, I'm a regular guy. The amount of money that I spend on stamps actually is quite limited. And the maximum I'm likely to spend is maybe a couple of $100, and that is rare, far in between. So, and my point is that you can collect EFOs without on a limited budget. I think that's very important to note. Lots of people don't look at EFOs simply because they think that they are unattainable in terms of price. Where in the EFO collector, which I edit, John Hotchner has been having a series for already 5 years now, just about it completed 5 years, called Not Spending Big Bucks. And it essentially is about how you can collect EFOs without busting your budget. So let me give you a couple of examples. You see here a stamp that that's essentially a that shows Jefferson. So it's very thematic, of course. In the upcoming EFOCC auction, because we hold an auction at the EFOCC every quarter, the starting bid is about $11. It's actually $10. There would be a 10% hammer fee. So if you buy it at the entry price, it's about, if you can buy it, that is, it's about $11. This one here, also a misperf with a perforation error, and also very thematic, the flag of our White House, the starting point is $7. This one, which shows false art, the starting price is, bidding price is $10 with 10% hammer fee would be $11. Then of course you would pay postage. So my goal is not so much to do an advertisement of the EFOCC, but I do want to make it clear that you can collect EFOs on a limited budget. So now I'm going to try to talk about why should you consider adding EFOs, error, tricks, and oddities to your collection. So suppose you collect paintings on stamps, or maybe you collect paintings and art from Juan Miró, who is the painter who painted this to honor Picasso. Maybe you collect his work. Maybe you collect, I don't know, art on stamps in general. At any rate, you may have one of many reasons for having these two items in your collection, a stamp and the corresponding first day cover. And if you don't collect any of these, then imagine that here there is a stamp and a first day cover that matches whatever you collect. Now, wouldn't you rather have this instead of the previous one? Now, what's the difference? There are two stamps added to these items, and if you notice, they are errors, EFOs. One of them, the left one, is essentially a perforation shift, and it is what we call a two-way perforation shift, because first the perforations were shifted upwards, otherwise they would be right here, and then they were shifted to the right because you see the receiver's excess space. Normally the E wouldn't go into the border here, so it would be essentially the stamp would be like this. The second one is perforated well, okay, all right, but if you notice now, there are here these little yellow and red dots, and as well as other color, yellow and red items that are out of place. Instead of being this red, instead of being within the O, like here, or like here, or like here, it is shifted down. Also, it is the yellow is also shifted down. So to me, when I look at this, these are from my collection, to me, I find it much more fun to have these two stamps as opposed to just the two normal ones, normal items. Now, each one of these actually were about $35 when I acquired them. So I didn't go broke over them. Now, this is the last slide that I will show you with no picture on it whatsoever, because I really want to focus on a set of reasons how EFO collecting changes essentially how you collect. The first thing is that you will start to look at stamps in a different way. You will be much more detail-oriented, and when you are detail-oriented, you will see many things at stamps that you have been looking already forever, many details that you have never noticed. So I think that it will improve collecting EFOs, and looking at what's wrong on stamps will improve the way you look at stamps, and not only on EFOs, but in stamps in general, because what will happen is, after a while, they will give you a stamp, and the first thing you look is there anything wrong with this stamp? So, and you will find that something is wrong more often than you think. Now, the second thing is that most EFOs are not listed in a stamp catalog. Sure, there are some that are listed. Major errors are listed typically, like in the Scott catalog, say, for US, or in the Scott Specialized. But most of them are not listed in any catalog. So you have to, in some way, to hunt them down, and I'll get into how we can do that. The next thing is, there is no such thing as a complete collection. If you have a subject that you are collecting in, and if it is in particular kind of narrow, at some point you are done. But you will always find new EFOs to add to the collection. So your collecting pleasure will double and triple. And if you are using ready-made album pages, well, there is no space for EFOs on those. Those are for regular stamps. So you will have to figure out what to do. You may decide to design your own album pages. Maybe you take an album page and you find an empty spot on that page in order to put the EFO. But anyway, it will in some way increase your creativity about collecting stamps. So I find that that's a lot of fun too. To me, a substantial amount of the fun is putting together the album pages. And then before long, you will ask, how did this happen? And then you will start to collect really EFO stamp production related information, such as printing techniques, perforators, and so on. You will get into what is called analytical collecting, okay? And analytical philately. And that's, again, if you don't have to do these things, but if you do them, it will be fun. So before I start going into details on EFOs, I want quickly to show two album pages actually from my collection. Oh, excuse me about this. I will go back. Okay. So here now, this is about, I collect paintings on stamps, and I like to essentially collect the paintings by a particular painter, let's say, put them together. The final product, this album page, is only the last step. I read about these painters, I learn about their work, and that's really a major part. Then I collect all the applicable stamps relating to a particular painting or painter, and then I put together such an album page. And here, and then what I do is I also collect information about the painting, like the information you would find in a museum about what is the name, when was it painted, and so on. This is my fun. And essentially, at the end, when I'm done, I have my personal mini gallery of paintings. Here, you are looking here, all these are good, but here I have added an EFO. So you see, you can take an existing collection and add an EFO. And to me personally, it's a lot of fun to be able to say, I have an EFO that I have added to this grouping of stamps. Okay, so now I want to go quickly into another one. This is an album page about Picasso and Picasso's famous painting Guernica. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail of Guernica. I could talk about it for the next half hour. But the point here is that when the Spanish post office was preparing this stamp to be printed, actually the painting was in the Museum of Modern Art in New York. So they didn't have a picture of the painting. So instead of calling up somebody in New York saying, hey guys, send us a painting, they found somewhere an early sketch of this painting, and this is what they printed. But because they put Guernica on it, that is, they represented that this is the Guernica basically, they created what is called a design error. I'll talk about design errors in a minute. But essentially, to me, it was a lot of fun to discover that and also to find out exactly examples of areas where the painting actually differed from the stamp. So this is something that you wouldn't get into if you didn't collect EFOs. So now what I want to do is I want to talk about EFOs. And essentially, first I'm going to go into color-related issues. On the right, what you see is an invert. These are the way I see it, the kings of errors, right? They are very visual. This is a bicolor stamp. It is a fairly relatively old stamp, and therefore, and as a result, there are not actually too many examples of it, of this error. So typically inverts are quite expensive. I don't think I have any inverts, but it's good to know about them. The inverted plane is also, of course, an invert. And because this stamp consists of two colors, it is essentially a bicolor. So is this one. And this one, the vignette, that is the center, is shifted relative to the frame. So this is called a sinking ship. Just like you can find this one, you can find also examples where the ship is up higher relative to the vignette, and that would be called, for example, a flying ship. You can have lots of fun with these shifted vignettes, and they are now relatively more affordable. Here, you are getting so many shifts on one stamp that basically it's a total mess. And I find these are, like, for me, among my favorites, because you really almost have to see the actual stamp to know what is shown. And you know, and they are typically not very expensive. So this is nice. Another type of errors, color error, is when a color is missing. Here you see the ochre color is missing, and therefore this is an error. Now, what this tells you probably is that either when this was printed, the machine had run out of the ochre color, or it was printed in multiple steps, and the step that printed the ochre color was omitted for some reason. If too many colors are omitted, you end up with something like this. It's an albino. Now, how do we know that this is code 2041 showing the Brooklyn Bridge? From here, you can't tell, but actually, if you took this stamp in your hand and you look at it obliquely, you can see essentially the pattern left by the printing plate. From there, you can tell what stamp it is. Here, sometimes color errors, missing colors, are not always due to the stamp not being printed here properly, but a perforation error, can also cause a missing color. Now, if you look at this stamp, the perforation is shifted downwards. Upwards. So the bottom of the stamp is not really visible here, right? Actually, this stamp has lots of problems because if you look at it, the upper perforation is also at an angle. But let's focus on the lower side now. If you see here, there is a blue. This blue is a different blue than the other blue. And because of the shift, it is not there. That is referred to as a color missing error because the blue is missing on the stamp. Now here, that blue is shown, but actually it should have been cut off during production. It wasn't because something went wrong. But because that is not on the stamp, it doesn't change the fact that this is a missing color. Sometimes they use, there are shading varieties in between different printings or even between different press runs of the same stamp. But here, if you look at it, this is much darker. And the reason why this one is, what is special about this one is that altogether the wrong ink was used. Now, when you are looking at a bunch of stamps, say, even in a dealer's dime box or something like that, it is very possible that nobody may have realized that the copy with the wrong ink is on an envelope that everybody who came ahead before you may have overlooked that, including the dealer. So you can pick it up right there, and right away you have an error that you obtained that may cause upward of $1,000. You have it probably for a dime or for $1. Here I continue with color-related issues, and here essentially the top one, the inkwell probably dried, so that we ended up here with a gradually disappearing picture. That is actually that you find that quite a bit. Here, there is some kind of color disturbance. We really don't know what the reason was, but the real color of this stamp, the Spanish stamp, is this. It is not this. So we don't know really for sure why the color is different here. With American stamps in general, we are luckier because in particular, the older stamps that were printed by the Bureau of Engraving and Printing, you could actually write to them to ask them why a particular error exists on a stamp. And they would reply to you, giving you the reason. In the previous slide where the wrong ink was used, it was exactly somebody who sent it in to the BEP, to the Bureau, and they told that person that this was the wrong ink. This stamp was printed on a press where multiple colors are printed in at once. In other words, the red and the blue and the black are not different run of the sheet of the paper to the press, but essentially it is all printed at once. Well, ink is a liquid, so sometimes it's going to splatter over, something will go wrong, and essentially the colors will get mixed up. If you look here, the blue actually has seeped into the red area, right? Here, altogether, so much was mixed that everything ended up becoming black. So this is another thing that is probably not very expensive, but it's a lot of fun to collect. If you look here, there was during the production of the stamp, during the printing, there is a wiping roller that removes the excess ink from the platen, and that somehow was damaged, so that excess ink was left in a random way, and this was actually printed, cut apart it was created, it was bound into a booklet and sold over a post office counter. Nobody realized until whoever bought it opened it and saw this problem. So this is also another example of something that can go wrong. Now, sometimes when stamps get printed in sheets, when the next sheet comes on top of the previous one, for some reason the ink on the previous one has not dried yet. In that case, you get something like that. This is referred to either as a set off or offset. That's a long story. I won't get into it, but you know what I mean. Essentially, this was the ink on the back of the stamp. If you notice, it's a mirror image. It was the ink that was on the previous stamp that essentially has rubbed off to this one. In front of that stamp, of course, there is a regular printing. So this is also something that is a lot of fun if you can come across it. Now, here, I'm going to talk a little bit about perforation issues. Now, probably the most visible type of perforation issue is, well, when the perforation is missing altogether, like this one. It's an imperf, essentially, and we collect typically, at least on US stamps, we collect imperf stamps in pairs in order to make it very clear that the perforation is missing. This is here a perforation shift. Perforation shifts often are a dime a dozen. They are cheap, you can get lots of them, you can get, they exist on lots of stamps, so that's one thing. Here is another Clara Mas stamp that similar to the one that I showed before, where there is a perforation shift. So this is a slanted perforation, so you can tell that, you know, you can try to take a guess what went wrong. It is possible in this case that the paper wasn't in the right position when the perforator perforated the sheet. Now, often what will happen is you will find, when you look at stamps, at panes of stamps, let's say, right, or multiple stamps, you will see that something like this, where, do you notice that this is normal size, this stamp, but these two are larger? Here, clearly, one thing that you can deduce is if the perforator was such that it all came down at the same time as one single unit, you couldn't have something like that. That means that probably this was perforated in rows, you see. So, and as after this row was perforated, before the next row was perforated, there was some kind of shift, and again. So this is actually, so you end up with stamps that are larger or smaller. You tend to find that a lot in older stamps because perforators were, I guess, more imprecise at the time. Many perforations were done manually. But now you see why we want to collect in perfs, really in pairs, because here it would be possible to essentially cut off this and end up with a partially imperfect stamp, because the remainder would be a regular size stamp, right? And if it was a little bit bigger yet on this side, you could have a stamp that is on both sides is imperforated, if you could slice off the perforation. So it is easy to have fakes on these, and therefore we want to have stamps that clearly show that it is not as such. In some cases, part of the perforations are missing, and here, this is, you see a case where the bottom perforation is missing. In this case, it is not necessary to have a pair because this is the edge of the the sheet, and this is the selvage, and therefore, you can clearly see that there is no perforation. This one is a change of design perforation, where the perforation was shifted just so at such a distance, let's say, right, that the resulting stamp, if you don't look at it carefully at first glance, looks like it could have been designed as such. So really, essentially, the perforation shift causes a new design. To me, change of design perforation shift is very nice. Now here, when you look at this here, these are, you will tell me, well, the perforation is off here too. That's true, but in this case, what happened is, before the perforation was done, the paper was folded, so that now essentially this was right on top of this. So you can see how the paper fold was, and as a result, you get what is called crazy perforations. These are also very visual, very fun to collect. Finally, in this one, you see that there is a paper crease in the lower right, and what happens is, in this case, that there was a paper crease, that the paper was slightly folded before it was printed. It was printed, and when you reopen now, essentially after printing, you see that there is a space that is left that is open, that is not printed. That's called a pre-printing paper fold. Sometimes a paper fold may happen here, for example, after printing, right? And it affected perforation. So anyway, so these are the perforations issues. Now I'm going to get to another set of errors that are a lot of fun also. It's called design errors. Before I get there, let me say that this is the one type of error that typically carries absolutely no premium, because every stamp is printed with the same error. And therefore, you can collect these, include them in a topical collection or thematic collection without spending any extra money. So what are design errors? Now here, if you look at this is a Monaco stamp that essentially celebrates Roosevelt with his stamps. But the engraver somehow, something went wrong, and FDR ended up with 6 fingers. So this is a design error, right? Something went clearly wrong during the design time. This one is also a lot of fun, because this is an Egyptian stamp that celebrates the Suez Canal. So, however, when they designed the stamp, they put a picture of the Panama Canal, because the Suez Canal has no locks. Here you are seeing clearly there are locks. So and actually the entrance of the Panama Canal is slightly in this shape. So you see they put in a picture of the Panama Canal. So figure out, this is how could they get this out printed for sale? It's amazing, but believe it or not, it happens all the time. Now, here, there is a site, this site, of which I gave the URL, the address here, that has hundreds of design errors like that. So go and check it out. These are stamps out of my collection. You notice that they say that they were printed, this is a set of paintings, the allegory of the 4 seasons, painted according to this stamp by Nicolas Mignard, a French painter. Well, actually, they were not painted by Nicolas Mignard. They were painted by his son. At the time that the French post office printed those, they were thought to be printed by Nicolas Mignard. But Several years later, they looked at them carefully and they decided that after all, they were printed by his son. So there you go. It's a retroactive design error. So these are kind of errors that you find. And now I want to talk a few minutes about where to find information on EFOs. So let me say that almost any philatelic publication invariably has some information about EFOs. Here you have a Linz issue, a relatively recent Linz issue, that tells you that some recent stamp without die cuts has been found. The die cuts are essentially today's perforations, right? So that's, here you go, an error. Then this postal stationery, I am a member of the UPSS. A few years back, I made a listing of articles that mention EFOs, and I can tell you that probably 80% of their issues had some information on EFOs. There is then, of course, there is the EFO collector, which is the EFOCC's publication that is focused solely on EFO. So that's also a good resource. You can find the older issues on the EFOCC website. I recommend you go and take a look at them. So what will happen is at some point you will find that when you see information, something that could be of interest to you on EFOs, you are clipping it and putting into a file, or I clip them essentially electronically and put them into a Microsoft Word document. You will be starting to collect your own information on EFOs. And then you are starting to become more an EFO aficionado. Then there are catalogs, but like this one, actually Scott has a specific error catalog, but the issue with these catalogs, they are very useful, but they, as I mentioned earlier, they focus only on major errors, okay? You are not going to find minor errors in catalogs. So that's why, for my purpose at least, they are of limited use. Dealer price lists and auction catalogs mention very frequently EFOs. So it's good to look at them and to make notes, because at some point you will end up, creating your own personal price database to know that, for example, perforation on this one, I saw it for $15, and here I found it for $250. You know that you have a discrepancy, and you know to go for the cheaper one. There are many websites that have one way or another EFO information, and on the EFOCC website, if you go onto resources, there are pointers to websites that have specifically EFO information. Another thing that you shouldn't forget is if you are looking at things like catalogs and so on that are expensive, and usually EFOs are only a small subset of the subject, at that point you can just go to the APS library, and they will, you can ask them for the information, and they will ship you a catalog that you can use for a few days and send back, or they will send you photocopies of pages. Get in touch with the APS librarian, and they are tremendously helpful. So the last item that I want to talk about is how to get EFOs, right? So how would you go about buying EFOs or getting EFOs? Well, the first thing that you should do is you should look at your daily mail. Okay, you wouldn't believe all the stuff that you will find there. Here are two examples from my daily mail. As you see, this one here, I received it in 1991, so it's a while ago, but it is a misperforated essentially stamp, right? It is right on the envelope, and by the way, EFOs on an envelope are even, I think, more fun than EFOs that are not on an envelope. because that means that they have gone through the mail, which is another, nice touch. Now, if you look at this one looks okay, except that I received it. Look at the date. It says July 9, 2019. I received it in 2016. So obviously, they had put into the cancel the wrong year. If you look at it, well, you can't see it really here. I shouldn't have cut it off. But this label has the correct year that says July 9, 2016. So this is something that I have come across that came to me in my mailbox. A good resource are dealers, okay? So dealers, when you go to a booth, you will run into dealers that you can ask. Dealers have websites. They send you price lists. All those may mention EFOs. Now, you have to be aware that depending on whether the dealer is knowledgeable or not, you may end up with different price levels. If the dealer is not knowledgeable, either will say, gee, this is extraordinary, and will mark it up all the way to an unrealistic level. You have to watch out for that. Or he will not realize that he will not even know that it's an error. He will put it with the regular stamps, and then you buy it at a regular price. Either one, you have to know what you are looking for. That's one thing with EFOs that is very important. You have to educate yourself. When I go to a dealer, usually, if the dealer has is not really a specialist, you ask him for EFOs. It is as if you had on your forehead, like, raise the price. So I don't ask for EFOs. I usually ask them for, if they ask me, what are you looking for? I said, I know, I'll know what I'm looking for when I see it. And I ask them for their stock books and so on. And in those, you will find plenty of EFOs. When you have a knowledgeable dealer, then it's something else. When you have a dealer who is knowledgeable and maybe specialist in EFOs, then you should tell him or her, because they have a lot of knowledge. From that dealer, you will not get a bargain. But you will get a fair price, because the dealer knows what the EFO will sell for. And one advantage that you have buying from a knowledgeable dealer, that dealer will tell you all kinds of information about the EFO, why it happened, how many there are likely to be, and where the EFO was found, what are similar EFOs, and so on and so forth, or if there are EFOs in a particular subject. So that is knowledgeable dealers are a very good resource. And then, if you know what to look for, look at dime boxes or dollar boxes, right? Like the one that I showed with the wrong ink before. You could find something like that in a dime box or in a dollar box and buy it for $1. So that's another thing. A good other resource that I use very heavily is the online marketplaces, eBay, Delcamp, Hipstamp. The reason is that they have very large selections, in particular on Delcamp. The amount of material you find is incredible. You can go as far as doing statistical analysis on the frequency of EFOs in there. So it's just mind-boggling. However, you have to be careful because you are buying from non-specialists. I tell you, on Delcamp, I have seen the very same item for €1.20 and for €30. So you have to know what you are looking for, what it is worth. When buying on marketplaces, obviously you want to be looking at the dealer reputations. You want to watch out for shipping costs. In particular, on eBay, it's better, usually. If the dealer is abroad, then you still have to be careful. On Delcamp, the shipping costs tend to be relatively high. And by the way, dealers will tell you that they accept returns. But if your item is not very expensive, even though you don't like a particular item you received, it might not be feasible to return it. So you have to count on to think about that too. And finally, when you are buying from international dealers, in particular on Del Camp, you have to make sure that the seller accepts a payment type that you can use, that you can pay in, like PayPal or something like that. Some of them may not, may accept only bank transfers. Bank transfers are very expensive from the United States, say, to a European country. Remember, there are no established prices for most EFOs. So just, it's very important to remember that. Auctions are a good thing, a good resource too, except that large auctions, like from dealers like Siegel, from houses like Siegel, Keller, they tend to list only major errors, and those are expensive. But you can go to some place like Stamp Auction Network or Philasearch and look at the auctions that are there. And there you will find many essentially smaller auction houses that will have EFOs that are very priced very reasonably. I have come across two Spanish auction houses, one in Madrid, one in Sevilla, where essentially I bought from them repeatedly, and the prices have been excellent. Finally, one thing that I want to mention is the EFOCC auction. The reason why the EFOCC auction is particular, first of all, you get a big concentration of EFOs. It basically has only EFOs, but it has also EFOs that are in lower price ranges that are not necessarily carried by auction houses. So that is why the EFO auction, if you are looking for EFOs, in particular getting started, are a good place to look at. Even if you don't want to buy, the stamps offered in the EFOCC auction are posted online. You can go and look at them, and you can see at least what kind of EFOs exist. So I think you should go and look at them, regardless of whether you want to buy or not, at least because you can also click on the pictures and magnify them, and the pictures are very good. You can see all kinds of details about the EFOs. So in closing, the EFO prices are really not related to rarity, okay? That's very important to note. I think websites are vital because you have plenty of time to evaluate the EFO you are looking at. Remember, EFOs are often one-offs. How can you describe in words the difference between these stamps and these stamps? Yet this one, in my opinion, is much, much more desirable than this one, because this is really a fairly good change of design error. This one is really not that much a change of design error because the perforation goes right through the writing. So these things you cannot really see in detail, right? So, and of course, using websites are great, because if you are like me, an introvert, and many stamp collectors are, then nobody bothers you. You are sitting in your basement looking, or in your man cave or woman cave, whatever, and looking at stamps and enjoying them. What I found, my experience is the most productive places to look for EFOs are the smaller auctions, the EFOCC auction, then come the marketplaces like eBay and Del Camp, and then the dealer websites. All three will give you plenty of EFOs. Finally, remember one thing. If you see an EFO that you like today, EFOs are one-offs. You may not see it again for the next 15 years, okay? So if you really think you like it, unless it is totally unreasonable price-wise, buy it. That's all I have. Thank you very much. Feel free to contact me at this email, or Dawn has additional contact information for me. And then I'll be happy to, now I'll be happy to talk to reply to any answers that you have.
Thank you very much.